What if I told you Wall Street isn't controlled by thousands of investors, market forces, or even the government, but by 12 families who've held power for over a century? You think the stock market is free? You think anyone can win? You think hard work and smart investments are all it takes? But here's what they don't tell you. The game was rigged before you were born. The same family names that controlled Wall Street in 1913 still control it today. And they've structured the entire financial system to transfer your wealth into their vaults. These aren't just billionaires, they're dynastic empires with bloodlines stretching back centuries. They own the banks that lend to governments. They control the investment firms that manage your pension. They sit on the boards of the corporations you work for. And when the system crashes, like it did in 1929, 2000, and 2008, they get richer while you lose everything. So before we expose the names, the wealth, and the mechanisms of control, drop a comment. Have you ever heard of the Rockefeller, Rothschild, or Morgan families? Because what you're about to learn will change how you see money, power, and the illusion of free markets forever. Hit subscribe, because Money Unsealed is about to reveal the empire they've spent centuries hiding. Let's talk about the 12 families who rule Wall Street. To understand who controls Wall Street today, you need to go back to 1913, the year the Federal Reserve was created and the year Wall Street's power structure was cemented into American law. In November 1910, a secret meeting took place on Jekyll Island, Georgia. 7 men representing the wealthiest families in America gathered in complete secrecy, no press, no government oversight, just 7 men drafting the blueprint for the Federal Reserve System. Among them, representatives of the Rockefellers, the Morgans, and the Rothschilds. Sound familiar? It should. Because in 1913, that blueprint became law. The Federal Reserve Act handed control of America's money supply to a private consortium of banks. Banks owned by these same families. They didn't just influence Wall Street. They built the architecture that made Wall Street the global financial center. By 1937, Time magazine published an investigation revealing that just 13 families controlled over $2.7 billion in corporate stock, equivalent to over $50 billion today. The Fords, Rockefellers, DuPonts, and Mellons alone held shareholdings valued at nearly $1.4 billion across 200 major corporations. These weren't passive investors. They controlled the boards. They dictated policy. They decided which industries thrived and which died. The Rockefellers, Standard Oil, Chase Manhattan Bank, and monopolistic control over American energy for decades. The Morgans, J.P. Morgan transformed Wall Street from a regional market into a global financial machine. His bank financed railroads, steel, electricity, and even entire governments. The Rothschilds, a banking dynasty spanning 5 countries, credited with financing wars, governments, and revolutions since the 1800s. By the mid-19th century, they were the richest family in the world. Sound familiar? Because by the 1920s, these families didn't just own companies, they owned entire industries. And when the Great Depression hit in 1929, they bought up distressed assets for pennies on the dollar, while 25% of Americans lost their jobs. Wealth transfer disguised as economic collapse. Fast forward to the 1980s. Deregulation swept Wall Street. The Glass-Steagall Act, designed to separate commercial and investment banking after the 1929 crash, was dismantled. Who benefited? The same family-controlled investment firms that had lobbied for decades to remove it. By 2000, the dot-com bubble burst. Trillions evaporated. But firms like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Citigroup, institutions tied to these dynastic families, emerged bigger and more powerful. Sound familiar? In 2008, the housing market collapsed. Lehman Brothers fell. Bear Stearns vanished. But J.P. Morgan Chase? Bailed out with $25 billion in taxpayer money and allowed to acquire distressed competitors Goldman Sachs? Bailed out and reclassified as a bank holding company to access Federal Reserve funds. The families behind these institutions didn't lose wealth. They consolidated it. And today? These same family names sit atop the largest investment firms, private equity giants, and asset management corporations controlling over $20 trillion in global wealth. Now here's where the conspiracy becomes receipt. An interlocking directorate is when the same people sit on the boards of multiple corporations. It's legal, it's common, and it's how 12 families control hundreds of companies without directly owning them. In 1937, Times investigation found that the Rockefellers, Mellons, and DuPonts controlled 15 of the top 200 corporations through shareholdings and board seats. They weren't just investors, they were kingmakers. Today, the structure is more sophisticated, but the principle is identical. Take BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, the three largest asset managers in the world, controlling over $20 trillion. They're the top shareholders in nearly every S&P 500 company. And who sits on their boards? Former executives from J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley, institutions directly tied to these family empires. Here's the receipt. In 2024, BlackRock alone held major stakes in Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, ExxonMobil, J.P. Morgan Chase, and Bank of America. Vanguard held the second largest stakes in the same companies. State Street held the third. Three firms. Same families. Total market control. And here's the kicker. These families don't operate in isolation. They're interconnected through marriages, shared board seats, and cross-ownership structures that date back over a century. The Rothschilds married into European banking dynasties. The Rockefellers partnered with the Morgans to dominate American oil and finance. The DuPonts controlled chemicals, gunpowder, and eventually the military-industrial complex. The Mellons financed aluminum, banking, and Gulf oil. And when a crisis hits, they buy. When the market crashes, they consolidate. When the government bails out banks, their banks get the money. You won't believe the names behind this empire. Because it's not just Rockefeller and Morgan. It's 12 family bloodlines that span continents, industries, and centuries. But first, you need to understand how they maintain control. Let's break down the exact mechanisms these 12 families use to control Wall Street, industries, and governments. The 12 families, based on historical records, financial disclosures, and investigative journalism. Here are the 12 family empires that control Wall Street. The Rockefellers, Standard Oil, Chase Manhattan Bank, energy monopolies. The Rothschilds, global banking dynasty, European central bank influence. The Morgans, J.P. Morgan Chase, investment banking, railroad financing. The DuPonts, chemical empire, gunpowder, military contracts. The Mellons, banking, aluminum, Alcoa, Gulf oil. The Vanderbilts, railroads, shipping, real estate. The Astors, real estate, 1/20th of New York City in 1890, opium trade. The Fords, automotive empire, manufacturing. The Carnegies, steel monopoly, U.S. Steel Corporation. The Warburgs, banking, Federal Reserve architects. The Schiffs, investment banking, railroad financing. The Lehmans, Lehman Brothers, until 2008, commodities trading, combined historical wealth. Over $2.7 billion in 1937, equivalent to $50+ billion today. Mechanism 1. Concentrated ownership through asset management. The modern structure is brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of directly owning companies, these families control the investment firms that own everything. BlackRock manages $10 trillion. Vanguard manages $7 trillion. State Street manages $4 trillion. Together, they're the largest shareholders in 88% of S&P 500 companies. And who founded, funds, and influences these firms? Executives and capital traced back to these 12 family networks. The Rockefeller Foundation holds significant positions in financial firms. The Rothschild investment banks manage trillions across Europe and Asia. The Morgan family legacy lives through J.P. Morgan Chase, the largest bank in America with $3.9 trillion in assets. This isn't conspiracy, it's corporate structure. Public records show the connections. SEC filings reveal the ownership, but nobody connects the dots. Mechanism 2. Interlocking directorates and board control. Here's how it works. Person A sits on the board of Bank X. Person A also sits on the board of Corporation Y and investment firm Z. Decisions made at Bank X benefit Corporation Y, which is financed by investment firm Z. All three entities coordinate strategy while appearing independent. In 1937, Time documented how the Rockefellers, Mellons, and DuPonts used this exact structure to control 15 of the top 200 corporations indirectly. Today, former Goldman Sachs executives sit on the boards of major corporations, the Federal Reserve, and government treasury departments. Former J.P. Morgan Chase executives lead regulatory agencies. The revolving door between Wall Street and Washington isn't a bug. It's the feature. Mechanism 3. Central banking and money creation. The Federal Reserve, created by these families in 1913, is the ultimate control mechanism. The Fed sets interest rates, controls money supply, and decides which banks get bailouts. And who owns the Federal Reserve? Technically, it's independent, but its 12 regional banks are owned by member banks: J.P. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, Bank of America. All institutions tied back to these family empires. When the 2008 crisis hit, the Fed created $16 trillion in emergency loans to bail out banks. Public records revealed that foreign banks tied to Rothschild interests received billions. Domestic banks controlled by Rockefeller and Morgan legacies got the rest. Who authorized it? The Federal Reserve Board, staffed by former Wall Street executives from these same institutions. Mechanism 4. Generational wealth and tax avoidance. These families don't pay taxes like you do. They use foundations, trusts, and offshore structures to avoid estate taxes and preserve dynastic wealth. The Rockefeller Foundation holds billions in assets, tax-free, while funding policy initiatives that benefit Rockefeller business interests. The Rothschild trusts span multiple jurisdictions, shielding wealth from taxation for over 2 centuries. The result? While the average American pays 20 to 30% in taxes, these families preserve 90+% of their wealth across generations through legal structures built by the lawyers and politicians they fund. Mechanism 5. Political influence and regulatory capture. These families don't just control markets, they control the referees. Campaign finance records show billions donated to both political parties by financial firms tied to these family networks. The result? Deregulation when they want freedom, bailouts when they need rescues, and legislation that crushes competitors. In 1999, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act repealed Glass-Steagall, allowing commercial and investment banks to merge. Who lobbied for it? Wall Street firms controlled by these families. Who signed it? Politicians funded by those same firms. In 2008, when the banks collapsed, who got bailouts? The same firms that caused the crisis. And who decided? Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson, former CEO of Goldman Sachs. Regulatory capture perfected, the system protects itself. Mechanism 6. Crisis, capitalism, and wealth consolidation. Here's the darkest truth. These families get richer during crashes. In 1929, while 25% of Americans lost jobs, the Rockefellers and Morgans bought distressed assets for pennies. In 2008, while homeowners lost $16 trillion in wealth, J.P. Morgan Chase acquired Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual, becoming the largest bank in America. In 2020, while small businesses closed permanently, BlackRock was hired by the Federal Reserve to manage bond buying programs, essentially choosing which corporations got rescued. The pattern is undeniable: create instability, consolidate during chaos, emerge more powerful. The global network. But it's not just American families. The network is global. The Rothschilds control banking interests across Europe. The Warburgs influenced German finance. The Sassoons dominated Asian trade. The Oppenheimers controlled diamond and gold markets in Africa. Together, these families form an interconnected web of wealth, power, and influence spanning continents. And when they coordinate, through institutions like the Bank for International Settlements, the World Economic Forum, and central banking summits, they dictate global financial policy. This is the Empire 12 families, hundreds of corporations, trillions in assets, and total control over the system you're forced to play in. So what are the stakes? Everything. This isn't ancient history, it's happening now. These families still control Wall Street, still influence governments, and still profit from every crisis. The 2026 economic reset? 2026 economic reset? They're positioning for it. The push for central bank digital currencies? It centralizes control even further. The next market crash? They'll consolidate while you lose. But here's the truth they don't want you to know. Awareness breaks the spell. When you understand the game is rigged, you stop playing by their rules. You move wealth into assets they can't print. Gold, land, Bitcoin. You build local economies and parallel systems. You stop feeding the machine that's designed to extract your labor and wealth. The 12 families built an empire on secrecy, complexity, and the illusion of free markets. But once you see the structure, the interlocking boards, the revolving doors, the bailouts that only flow upward, you can't unsee it. Drop a comment. Did you know these families existed? And if this investigation opened your eyes, subscribe to Money Unsealed, because we're just getting started. Next video: how the Rothschilds built their banking empire and why governments fear them. The empire is real. The control is total. But knowledge is power, and you just became dangerous.